Sign here, sweetheart, my father said, sliding a document across the kitchen table like he was asking me to approve a grocery list. It's just a formality, estate paperwork from your grandfather's trust. I was 31 years old, home for Thanksgiving, still in the coat I hadn't taken off yet. My carry-on was sitting by the front door. I had driven 3 hours from Portland in rain so heavy I could barely see the white lines on I-5. I was exhausted. My father knew that. I didn't read it carefully. That was my mistake. The one I will carry for a long time. My brother was at the counter, pretending to scroll through his phone. My mother was at the stove, stirring something that didn't need stirring. Nobody was looking at me, and I should have noticed that. When people work too hard at not watching you, they're watching you very carefully. I signed. My grandfather had passed 8 months earlier. He was a quiet man who had built a decent life running a chain of auto body shops in the Tacoma area. He wasn't wealthy by any spectacular standard, but he had saved carefully and left behind a trust valued at just under $400,000. His will was clear. I was named as the primary beneficiary, partly because I was the oldest grandchild and partly I always believed because he knew I was the one who actually visited him. I drove up every few weeks, sat with him through his chemo appointments, ate bad hospital cafeteria sandwiches beside him while he made jokes about the coffee. My brother visited twice in 3 years. Both times there was a holiday involved. I found out what I had signed 4 months later, not from my family, but from a paralegal at the law firm handling my grandfather's estate. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was eating lunch at my desk. She was confused. She wanted to confirm that I had, in fact, authorized my father as the executor with full discretionary power over asset distribution. She wanted to confirm that I had agreed, in writing, to defer my inheritance pending a 5-year business reinvestment clause tied to something called Clearwater Home Solutions, LLC. I set down my fork. What is Clearwater Home Solutions? There was a pause. It's listed as a home renovation and staging company, registered in Washington State 6 months ago. Your brother is listed as the primary operator. I sat very still for a moment. Can you send me a copy of what I signed? I asked. She sent it within the hour. It was 11 pages. I had signed page 9 where the signature line was. I had not read pages 2 through 8, which restructured the entire distribution framework of the trust and funneled the liquid assets into a business investment account controlled jointly by my father and my brother. I called my father that evening. He answered on the second ring, which told me he had been expecting the call. Dad, I said, what is Clearwater Home Solutions? He took a breath. The kind of breath people take when they've rehearsed an explanation but are deciding which version to use. It's an opportunity, sweetheart. Your brother has a real vision here. He's been trying to get off the ground for 2 years, and the trust gave us the bridge we needed. You're stable. You have a good salary. You don't need a lump sum the way he does. Grandpa would have wanted us to think practically. Grandpa left that money to me. Grandpa left that money to the family, he said, and his voice had a firmness in it that I recognized. It was the voice he used when a decision had already been made, and the conversation was a courtesy. The trust had a discretionary management clause. I exercised it. You'll still receive something when the business is profitable. When it's profitable, I repeated, your brother needs this. You know how hard things have been for him. My brother was 34 and had started and abandoned 4 businesses in 6 years. A food truck, a dropshipping operation, a cryptocurrency consulting service, and something involving custom sneakers that I never fully understood. Each time my parents had found a way to fund him. Each time I had quietly watched and said nothing because it wasn't my money they were spending. This time it was. I want the inheritance back, I said. All of it. I want the trust distributed as my grandfather intended. My father's voice cooled. That's not how trust law works, and you know it. You signed the document. Under false pretenses. I didn't know what I was signing. You're a grown woman. You should have read it. He wasn't wrong about that. And he knew using that against me would land hardest. He had counted on it. On calling an estate attorney, I said, go ahead. His tone was completely level, but I'd think carefully before you make this ugly. I still know the people at Hargrove Architects. One conversation and the Meridian contract disappears. You've worked on that project for 2 years. Be smart about this. The Meridian contract was the biggest commission my firm had landed in a decade. I was the lead architect. Losing it wouldn't just hurt me, it would hurt 12 other people on my team. I didn't say anything else. I hung up. I stood in my kitchen in Portland, looking at the rain on the window, and I understood something clearly for the first time. My father wasn't someone who had made a mistake out of favoritism. He had planned this. He had waited for the right moment, the right document, the right level of exhaustion in me. This was not an impulse. This was a strategy. I didn't sleep that night. I also didn't call anyone in a panic, which is the one thing I did right in those early days. I made a list instead. What I knew, what I could prove, what I needed to find out. By Friday morning, I had retained an estate attorney named Miss Breda Okafor, who had 20 years of trust litigation experience and a manner so calm and precise it made me feel slightly better just sitting across from her. She reviewed the document I had signed and the original trust terms, and she confirmed what I suspected. The management clause my father had invoked was legitimate on its face, but the manner in which the document had been presented to me, without disclosure of its contents, without independent counsel, under time pressure, gave us grounds to challenge it. What she couldn't tell me yet was whether we could win before my father found a way to make my professional life impossible. That question got answered the following Monday. I arrived at my firm at 8 in the morning and found my access badge wasn't working. I stood at the front door for a confused 30 seconds, swiping it again and again before a colleague let me in from the other side. I went up to my floor. My project manager was waiting near the elevator. Her expression was the kind people wear when they've been asked to deliver news they wish someone else was delivering. She walked me to the conference room. My managing director was inside. So was someone from HR I'd never met. The managing director slid a folder across the table. "We received some concerning communications over the weekend," he said. He wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Emails sent from your account to several of our major clients, including the Meridian Group. The content is erratic. There are accusations made about colleagues. There's language that raises serious questions about your judgment and stability." I opened the folder. The emails had my name, my email address, my signature block. The writing was close enough to my style to be unsettling, but the content was not mine. Paranoid, accusatory, scattered. One of them accused the Meridian project lead of stealing my design concepts and threatened to expose him publicly. Another was addressed to a city planning commissioner and contained what read like a threat. "I didn't write these," I said. "Your father called us on Saturday morning," the managing director said. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. "He said you'd been under significant stress related to a family estate dispute and that he was worried your mental state had deteriorated. He mentioned possible medication changes. He said he felt it was his responsibility to inform us given your access to sensitive client relationships." I felt the room tilt slightly, not with dizziness, with the recognition of something I hadn't fully processed before that moment. My father had not just stolen my inheritance. He had built a structure around it, a story. And the story was that I was unstable, that my anger about the trust was evidence of psychological deterioration, and that anything I said from here on out would be colored by that framing. I was placed on administrative leave pending an internal review. I walked out of the building into the gray Portland morning, and I sat in my car for a long time without starting it. Within the week, the architecture was fully visible. My brother had posted on his Instagram about Clearwater's upcoming launch. He had tagged my father. The post showed renovation mood boards, a new logo, a smiling photo of both of them at what looked like a newly staged property. The comments were full of encouragement. Several people I'd grown up with had liked it. Nobody mentioned me. My mother called once, that same week. She said she hoped I would come to understand that the family had done what was necessary. She said my grandfather had always worried that large sums of money given without purpose created entitlement. She said she believed I would look back on this and recognize it as a gift. I didn't respond. What I did instead was this. I went to the public library because I didn't trust my home internet after what had happened with the emails, and I began to dig. Clearwater Home Solutions had been registered 6 months before my grandfather died. That detail stopped me. I sat with it for a while. The timing meant my father had begun constructing this before he knew the full terms of the inheritance, possibly before my grandfather had finalized them. He had been preparing. I pulled every public filing I could find: business registration, articles of incorporation, registered agent information. The initial capitalization was small, $10,000, but 3 weeks after my grandfather's estate closed, the company received a capital infusion of $380,000, listed as an internal investment transfer, listed under my name as the source. I kept reading. Clearwater was billing itself as a home renovation and staging company, but the business address was a mail forwarding service in Tacoma. There was no physical office. The website had been built on a template and had 5 pages of content, none of it specific. The portfolio section showed staged homes that reverse image searched to stock photo sites and real estate listing aggregators. Nothing was original, nothing was real. But there was revenue listed in the quarterly filings. Significant revenue, far beyond what a 6-month-old staging company with no verifiable clients or completed projects could plausibly generate. Consulting fees, design retainer contracts, private membership tiers for something called the Clearwater Renovation Network. None of it added up, unless the revenue wasn't coming from actual clients. I sat back and looked at the screen. My father's main business was a mid-sized property management company that handled commercial leases across the Tacoma and South King County area. He had been managing it for 20 years. He had always maintained a comfortable income from it, but in the last several years, based on filings I could access, margins had tightened. Several major tenants had not renewed. There were deferred maintenance costs accumulating on 2 of his larger properties. He had personally guaranteed a commercial loan that matured in 18 months. I looked at the cash flowing through Clearwater. I looked at the source codes on the invoices listed in the quarterly reports. I looked at the client names, vague LLC formatted, none of them searchable. I wasn't certain. I'm not an accountant, but I understood enough to see the shape of it. Money was moving from somewhere into Clearwater, being classified as legitimate business revenue, and then being used to service my father's other debts. The trust funds, my inheritance, were providing the starting capital and the credibility, but there was more coming in than I had given. And then I found the piece that made my hands go cold. In the company's initial registration documents, there was a secondary officer listed. Not my brother, not my father, me, my name, my social security number, and an address I had lived at 3 years ago. I was listed as the chief financial officer of Clearwater Home Solutions, LLC. I had never agreed to this. I had never been informed of it. But there it was, with what appeared to be my signature on the officer consent form dated 11 days after my grandfather's funeral. I was the CFO of a company that appeared to be running money through fraudulent invoices. If anyone ever looked at Clearwater, the first name they would find with financial oversight responsibility was mine. I was a licensed architect. I had no criminal record, no tax issues, a clean professional history. I was the perfect cover. I called my father from a payphone outside the library. I know that sounds strange. I didn't want to use my cell phone. I found the company filings, I said when he picked up. I know what Clearwater is. I know my name is on the officer documents. I know the revenue isn't real. There was a pause, shorter than I expected. You always were thorough, he said. There was something almost approving in his voice that made my skin crawl. Here's what you should understand. You are listed as the CFO. You signed the officer consent form. If you take this to anyone, any attorney, any regulator, any tax authority, you are not the whistleblower. You are the officer of record for every transaction in that company's history. I have an accountant ready to produce documentation showing you are actively involved in the financial management. Your signature is on 3 additional internal documents you haven't found yet. I didn't say anything. You're smart, he continued. Be smart about this. Walk away. Let the trust settle. Let your brother build something. In a few years, when things are stable, we'll make it right with you. You have your career. You have your life. Don't throw that away over this. My career is currently suspended, I said. That resolves itself once you stop antagonizing the situation. He said it so easily. Like my employment, my reputation, my professional standing, all of it was a dial he could turn up or down at his convenience. I'll think about it, I said. I hung up and stood outside the library in the cold for a while. A man walked by walking a dog. A woman pushed a stroller. Normal life, continuing on the other side of a wall I had apparently been living behind without knowing it. I went back inside. There are moments when you stop asking what you're supposed to do and start asking what you're actually capable of. I wasn't going to outmaneuver my father in a direct confrontation. He had more resources, more connections, and he had spent months building the architecture while I had spent those same months working 60-hour weeks and believing my family was basically decent. I couldn't win a legal battle in the short term, not with my name on those documents, not with the fabricated emails already in my employer's hands. But I had one thing he hadn't accounted for: my grandfather. Not in a sentimental sense. I mean, specifically, my grandfather's habits, his routines, the particular paranoia that came from decades of watching employees and family members and business partners behave badly when they thought no one was looking. He had kept records of everything, not just financial records, everything. Notes on conversations, copies of documents, handwritten logs going back 30 years. I had known this about him. I had sat in his office many times while he pulled out folders and ledgers and showed me things he was proud of, things he was worried about, things he wanted documented. I had helped him scan a decade of paper records into a digital archive the year before he got sick. He had given me the hard drive to keep because he said his house had too many people in and out of it, and he didn't trust where things would end up after he was gone. I had the hard drive. I hadn't opened it in months. It was in a box in my storage unit. I drove there that evening. It took me 2 hours to find the right folder. My grandfather had organized things in a way that made sense to him and to no one else. But eventually I found a subfolder labeled simply with my father's name and a date range covering the last 4 years. Inside were scanned copies of correspondence, emails my grandfather had printed out, a memo he had written to himself in his precise handwriting after a meeting with his estate attorney, and a series of photographs taken on his phone of documents spread on his office desk. The photographs were dated 14 months before he died. The documents in the photos were early drafts of my grandfather's trust. In the margins of one page, in handwriting I recognized as my father's, someone had written notes, adjustments, suggestions for how the management clause could be broadened, how a discretionary power provision could be inserted in language that would look standard to a layperson. My grandfather had photographed these because he was suspicious. He had not changed his will in response. Perhaps he didn't believe his son would actually follow through, or perhaps he didn't want the confrontation. But he had documented it. He had left the documentation with me on a hard drive in a sentence he said to me once that I had not fully understood at the time. If anything ever seems off after I'm gone, look at what I left you before you look at anything else. I sat in my storage unit on a folding chair until 11 o'clock at night, going through everything. There was more. A voicemail transcript my grandfather had paid someone to transcribe from a call between my father and the family estate attorney, which my grandfather had recorded legally under Washington's one-party consent law. In the call, my father and the attorney discussed how to structure the management clause to give maximum discretionary authority while remaining challengeable only through expensive litigation. The attorney had expressed some hesitation. My father had responded by referencing a referral agreement they had in place that was worth significant ongoing business to the attorney's firm. There was also a letter, handwritten, never sent, addressed to me. My grandfather had written it about 6 months before he died. In it, he told me he was worried about what would happen to the trust. He told me he had tried to protect it as best he could, but that he was old and tired and he didn't have the energy left to fight his own son openly. He told me that the hard drive had everything I would need if I decided to fight. He told me he was sorry. I read that letter 3 times. I spent the next 3 weeks working carefully and quietly, the way my grandfather would have done it. I made copies of everything on the hard drive and stored them in 3 separate places. I brought the documentation to Ms. Okafor, my estate attorney, who referred me to a colleague who specialized in financial fraud. I also made a call to the Washington State Department of Revenue's Tax Enforcement Division, not to make an accusation, but to ask a general question about the process for reporting suspected fraudulent business filings. The person I spoke to was helpful. He told me the process. He also told me that whistleblowers who brought documented evidence of tax fraud were afforded significant legal protections. I researched wrongful termination law in Oregon. I made notes. I did not contact my father. I did not contact my brother. I did not respond to my mother's 2 additional voicemails. My brother had scheduled a launch event for Clearwater Home Solutions at a renovated event space in the South Lake Union neighborhood of Seattle. It was positioned as a business networking evening, an opportunity to introduce the company to potential investors and commercial real estate contacts. It was going to be attended by several of my father's longtime business associates. He had spent real money on it. Catering, a photographer, printed materials with the Clearwater logo. I was not invited. Of course I wasn't, but the venue was a public event space that took bookings online, and I had purchased a ticket under my married name, which my family had always found it inconvenient to remember. I arrived 40 minutes after the listed start time when the room was full and the energy was established. My father was at the far end of the room talking to 2 men in suits I didn't recognize. My brother was near the bar laughing too loudly at something the way he does when he's nervous. My mother was speaking to a woman I recognized as the wife of one of my father's commercial tenants. My brother saw me first. His face went through several expressions very quickly. He started moving toward me. I walked past him. My father noticed me when I was about 10 feet away. He stepped away from his conversation and moved to intercept me, smiling with his mouth but not anything else. "You need to leave," he said quietly. "Right now, before this becomes something it doesn't need to be." "I'm just here for the launch," I said. "I'm a supporter of small business. Don't do this." "I found Grandpa's hard drive," I said, "the one he gave me before he died. I found the photographs of the trust drafts. I found the voicemail transcript. I found the letter he wrote to me." I paused. "I also filed a report with the Department of Revenue 3 days ago, and I've been in contact with my attorney about the fraudulent officer filing, and I've retained separate employment counsel about my termination." His expression didn't collapse. I'll give him that. He was controlled, but something behind his eyes went very still, the way water goes still right before it freezes. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said, "and so does the Department of Revenue investigator assigned to the case, and so does my estate attorney, and so does the employment attorney who, as of this morning, has sent a demand letter to my former firm." I looked at him steadily. "I'm not calling the police, Dad. They're already involved. I called them before I came here. I had asked, as a condition of my cooperation with the state investigation, to be informed before any action was taken at a public venue. They had agreed because they wanted the documentation I had provided to be handled correctly, and because an investigator had been present at the launch event for the past 20 minutes, standing near the catering table, looking at his phone. I saw my father register the man near the catering table. I watched him recalculate. "There's still a way to resolve this privately," he said. His voice was very low. "Whatever you think you have." "Dad," I said, "I have Grandpa's letter." He went quiet. 2 things happened in the next 6 minutes. The investigator made a call. My father's phone buzzed, and he looked at it, and the expression on his face was the one I had never seen before in 31 years of being his daughter. Genuine fear. My brother, who had been hovering nearby, pretending to look at a display of Clearwater-branded materials, picked up enough of the conversation to understand the shape of what was happening, and he left the building through a side door so fast that the woman he was talking to turned around confused to find nobody there. The state investigation into Clearwater Home Solutions was formal and took several months. My father cooperated eventually when his attorney advised him that the documentation I had provided made non-cooperation untenable. The fraudulent officer filing was vacated. The trust distribution was reopened with court oversight. The fabricated emails were traced to a device registered to a property management assistant who turned out to have been instructed by my father, and that piece of evidence resolved my wrongful termination case. My former firm settled quickly once their employment attorney saw the documentation. The estate attorney who had drafted the amended trust documents lost his license to practice law in Washington state. My father did not go to prison. I want to be honest about that because this isn't a story where everything ends perfectly. He reached a settlement with the state that required full restitution, substantial penalties, and 5 years of supervised compliance for his property management business. He and my mother sold the house in Tacoma. My brother's business was dissolved and his name removed from the trust entirely. My grandfather's trust, distributed as he intended, restored my inheritance with interest that had accrued during the disputed period. I used it to buy a small architectural firm in Portland. Not the practice I'd originally planned to purchase, but a different one, smaller, with 3 employees and a client base that values exactly the kind of careful, detail-oriented work that I have spent my whole career developing. The sign on the door is simple. Just my last name and the word architecture. My brother texted me 8 months later. The message said he hoped I understood he hadn't known everything and that he hadn't meant for it to go that far. I read it twice. Then I set my phone face down on my desk and went back to the drawing I was working on. My mother has not contacted me. I think about my grandfather sometimes when I'm sitting at my drafting table early in the morning before anyone else comes in. He was not a perfect man. He saw what was happening and waited too long to stop it. But he kept the records. He kept them carefully, organized in his particular way, on a hard drive he handed to me with a specific set of instructions that I didn't understand until I needed to. He knew me well enough to know I would eventually look. Some people protect you openly, with declarations and confrontations and the kind of loud, visible loyalty that gets remembered at funerals. My grandfather protected me quietly, with a hard drive and a handwritten letter and the patience of a man who understood that the truth doesn't always arrive on schedule, but if you document it correctly, it tends to arrive eventually. I settled every debt, his and mine. I've thought a lot about what made the difference. Not in the legal outcome, but in the moment I stopped feeling like a victim and started thinking like someone who actually had a chance. It wasn't anger. Anger was there, obviously, when I found my name listed as CFO of a company I'd never heard of, when I saw what appeared to be my signature on documents dated 11 days after I stood over my grandfather's casket. The anger was real and it was loud. But anger alone would have gotten me nowhere. My father had counted on anger. He had designed the whole situation to make me react emotionally, to make me call people I shouldn't call, say things I couldn't take back, move before I understood the terrain. The night he told me I was already the lead defendant in my own family's fraud, that's exactly what he wanted me to do. Panic, lash out, hand him the thing he needed to discredit me completely. What saved me, I think, was learning to sit with discomfort long enough to think through it instead of away from it. 3 weeks of ramen and library computers and public records isn't glamorous. It's just work. Quiet, unglamorous, necessary work. Nobody's going to make a highlight reel out of it, but that's where the real fight happens. Not in the dramatic confrontation, not in the final scene at the launch party, but in the weeks before when you're tired and scared and the outcome is genuinely uncertain. And you choose to keep going anyway because the alternative is letting someone else write the ending of your story. My grandfather understood this. He didn't fight openly. He didn't confront my father directly, even when he had reason to. He documented. He photographed. He kept records in a hard drive and handed it to the person he trusted most, with a sentence I didn't fully understand until I needed to. That's a specific kind of intelligence. Not the kind that's loud or impressive at dinner parties, but the kind that holds its shape under pressure, that thinks about what happens 3 steps from now instead of just the next 5 minutes. He passed that along to me without making a speech about it. He just lived it and hoped I was paying attention. What I carry from all of this isn't bitterness, though I won't pretend bitterness isn't somewhere in the mix. What I carry is a much clearer understanding of what integrity actually costs. It's not a value that pays off immediately. It doesn't make you popular or comfortable or safe in the short term. My grandfather's integrity cost him the peace of open confrontation with his own son. My integrity cost me my job, my professional reputation for a period, my relationship with my entire immediate family. Those are not small costs. Anyone who tells you doing the right thing is easy hasn't paid the real price for it yet. But here's what I also know. My father built something elaborate and expensive and carefully planned, and it came apart because one person, one tired, broke, scared person sitting in a public library, refused to accept the version of herself he had decided she was. That's not luck. That's a choice, made repeatedly, over weeks, under conditions designed to make the opposite choice feel easier. The sign on my office door is just my last name and the word architecture. It's a small sign. The firm is small, but every client who walks through that door is walking into something I built with work that was mine, on a foundation that is clean. My grandfather would have appreciated the straightforwardness of that. He wasn't a man who needed things to be grand, he just needed them to be honest. I think about the letter he wrote me sometimes, the one he never sent. He was sorry he hadn't protected me better. I want him to know he did exactly enough.